Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of What We Can't Not Talk About, the podcast of the Austin Institute for the Study of Family and Culture. Today, we address a topic that has been very dear to me, especially during my time in law school. As our guest may or may not remember, probably will ask him. Our guest, indeed, is not only one of the two authors of the new book that we will discuss, Religious Freedom and Human Rights. He's also a full professor of comparative public law at the University of Padova, which, yes, is my alma mater. Professor Andrea Pin is a senior fellow at the Center for Study of Law and Religion at Emory University and a member of the scientific committee of ASIS International Foundation. He was a visiting professor at the University of Emory and also at the University of Notre Dame, a visiting fellow at the Kellogg Institute for International Studies, and also a clerk justice at the Italian Constitutional Court. So what I would like to add, in addition and above all this, and in addition to his 3 books and multilingual papers and articles, I would like to add before we start that Professor Andrea Pin is a man who mentored many young law students with the true care of a teacher. And he did that when he was just a postdoc. So I'm pretty sure that this part of his work continues to be led in this particular way. And I would say that I found that same attitude, the same true desire to teach rather than to prove one's own point, or worse, to indoctrinate. I found that this attitude is the one that animates this latest book that he published along with and wrote along with Professor John Witt Jr., professor of law at Emory. So for now, the book Religious Freedom and Human Rights is available only in Italian, but we will ask him whether this is going to be translated or not. And after this long but absolutely due introduction, I want to talk about these issues with Professor Andrea Pin himself, who kindly accepted our invitation to join us. So good morning or good afternoon, Andrea, and welcome on our show.
Thanks for having me. Thank you very much.
It is a pleasure to have you. And before we get started and talk about the book, about you, anything I forgot or that you would like to add?
I think you depicted me very well, and my mom would hardly believe what you said, but that's in the book. So yeah.
Well, moms are usually right, aren't they?
Yeah, but yeah, she will surely agree with you. But
well, we also, nothing that anyone needs to know, but we also share the birthday, and I think it's only the people I know is you, me, and Thomas More. So I think we're in very good company, being the patron of lawyers. That said, one usually asks, why writing this book, right? That's the question one does to asks an author. But since these religious freedom, comparative law are the topic, that's your scholarship, I would like to start somewhere else. And where I would like to start is a question that I think our young students and our prospective law students would want to hear your answer is like, how and why did you get interested in the topic of comparative law and of religious freedom?
Thanks. It's of course it's a broad question. It's hard to pin down why I was really drawn to it. I would say that comparative law is a challenge for everybody who was interested in law, because law has to do with what is fair, what is just, right? Whether you're a positivist or a natural law enthusiast, of course you care about what is fair and just. And when you're confronted with different opinions, what is fair, what is just, of course this challenges the way we see things, because we realize that other reasonable people with whom we agree on substantial grounds, but can have different views about the same things. And so you discover that there's a sort of sizable disagreement on a variety of views on matters that are very important for me and for us. And so I like comparative law because it forces to think harder of what we take for obvious. And I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
No, and and I subscribe to everything you said, having been a criminal lawyer enthusiast that loved comparatism, because of this, the same reasons, like what is a crime here and what is a crime there, and then you discover it's the same things, are crimes everywhere. Uh, Largely. Religious freedom? Why?
Yeah, so religious freedom has to do with what people believe to give a meaning to their lives, whatever it is. So it has to do with everybody's search for meaning in their lives, and everybody's search of happiness, and the pursuit of happiness and the pursuit of truth, I think, are the most interesting things in life. And how this can be framed matters in language of rights and duties as a challenging task. And I think it's very interesting. Long story short, when you do comparative law and religion, you actually compare different ways of dealing with the heaviest matters of law and of life at large. And this is why I like the topic a lot.
Such as?
You mean,
With
yeah,
what topic? Like what topic come to mind are the ones that religious?
yeah, yeah, sure. So when you talk about religious freedom, you're talking about the space that everybody wants for them, for him or herself, in which they can try to grasp what is the meaning of life, what they're here for, and what they should strive to achieve. And so religious freedom is a way of respecting that space of everybody, no matter what they believe. And I think it's fascinating. It's both a way to understand more of people's lives, and also to understand more how societies understand what is the role of the group vis-a-vis the individual when it comes to respecting them.
Yeah, as I mentioned at the beginning, I remember meeting you before that as a mentor, but then coming to your office hours to discuss the judgments about the crucifix in the classrooms. I think that was the times, like more like the Lao-Tzu judgment. I think it was in those years, which we could talk about. But I would like to follow like the train of thoughts that I was following as I was reading your book, which I absolutely loved. The book being, as I said at the beginning, Religious Freedom and Human Rights, Origins and Futures between the United States and Europe. So there is this kind of comparatism that, again, is also, you describe as like what makes it even more interesting to discuss about religious freedom. And I think there's an added value for all the lawyers, in looking at other countries, and in this global economy and global information in world that we live in, it comes even easier. But at the same time, there is something you point out, not so much in your book, but in an article you published in December last year that I think Canopy Forum was where it appeared, where first off, as a comparative lawyer, you and other authors are warning people reading judgments from one country and another and thinking that you can apply one judgment in one place or one policy because it seems to work. Is that what you were was that the point you were trying to make? Do you think that there is a risk in comparatism today because of the fact that we can look so easily and so quickly at other countries' laws and judgments, and yeah, and think that they could apply to us?
Yes, I think there's a danger of underestimating the differences between civilizations and societies, and this basically um, would lead us toward an approach that just tries to stretch ideas and solutions beyond what is reasonable. So, just to pick for what you said, Marianne. So think of the crucifix. I have this kind of conversation, and I can't remember how many times, not with you, but with colleagues. So you will hear many colleagues saying that the crucifix should stay, and others say, that crucifix shouldn't be in classrooms, for instance. And they try to draw an inference out of that applies everywhere. So no religious symbols or some religious symbol. But when it comes to reality of fact, Italians were not asked whether they wanted to keep or remove, to put or remove the crucifix from the walls of classrooms. They were actually asked whether they want to remove something that had been there for decades and even centuries. So there are symbolic components of religious matters in public spaces that you cannot really distinguish from centuries of history and from a society understanding itself. So although I'm skeptical about the treatment of religious symbols in France, I can understand that France cherish is the idea of having a secular space so much that some things that are usually not done here are perfectly okay there. Even
Here you mean in Italy? By here,
yes,
okay.
saying here in Italy, or you can say here in the United States. So it really depends on how society understands itself and how society goes about making decisions about meaning of life for the group and for individuals, and how this has been the case for centuries or even millennia. There are countries for which it's very important to have religious symbols because those symbols are symbols of deep identification with a certain story. It says what they are. Think about the Greeks when it comes to the crucifix vis-a-vis the Ottoman Empire. I'm just giving an example. You can do the reverse for Muslim countries that at some point became something else or they re-embraced Islam, like Afghanistan did after the Soviets, right? So there's always something deep that lies underneath the surface of religious freedom matters. And I think this is what we wanted to achieve both with the book and with the blog post you mentioned. When you deal with religious freedom and when you deal with other rights, you're actually not dealing with purely individual or ephemeral clashes that change overnight. You are dealing with sophisticated engines that have been there and developed for decades or centuries. So when you handle them, you're actually making things move in ways that are not compatible in all scenarios. So, for instance, something that happens here in Italy can be okay. Something happens there in the United States cannot be okay now because it does not really resonate with the society. I know it sounds somehow relativistic, but as we try to explain in the book, there are centuries behind us, and we are building on centuries of tradition. Whether we are aware of that or not, we still stand on the shoulders of giants. Sometimes we can, of course, criticize our giants, but they are there, and they are there for most of society.
I wholeheartedly agree with you, having lived in several places. And I was about to ask you, what's the added value of your book, considering that there are a lot of publications, but you just mentioned it. And I think that's exactly right. And the the accusation of being relativistic, I think it's particularly important with the youngest generations, whom, when finding right answers, think as already Aristotle. No, I think was it. I think it was Plato that said, that the young are not good for being philosophers or like for being politicians, because like they still have these ideals that, and they think that one size fits all, and then we're just gonna go and again we're gonna do it. Um, so it's very important to stress that the ability to see the differences doesn't mean being relativistic. Which again, on young minds, but also I would consider the minds of today, even of old people, young minds, because we read less, we study less, and there is a desire to finding solutions that will work will easy and work for the policy that works for everyone. And I thank you for saying also that there needs to be different policies according to where we are, because that is exactly why I've had a hard time this past years to explain how I can be totally okay with the overturning of Roe v. Wade and almost okay with the Italian law on abortion that still allows for abortion in the first trimester, because the reasonings, because the rights, because the constitutions, because the systems are completely different. And so the question is like, well, but what do you think about abortion? Is absolutely somehow out of the question for the moment, right? Like, or if not out, is less important. So thank you, because this was a much needed explanation. One thing that I was, you make a good historical, you provide a good historical account of religious freedom. And so, when would you say religious freedom appeared? And I was curious if you would define a Western concept.
It's a good question. Of course, there are books, and my co-author John Whitty is certainly much better placed than I am to respond to that question. But as I think we show in the book, the process of realization that there needs to be some sort of protection for religious freedom suffers slowly but progressively. There's no place of birth or date of birth for religious freedom such, although of course we like to identify signposts, of course, but that would oversimplify the scenario. I would say that you will see people claiming that they want to practice their own faith, and that's one component. And the more pluralistic societies become, the more frequently you see that statement, and that certainly helps understanding when things start moving and when people start realizing that there needs to be some right to practice your own religion. That started with the Roman Empire, late Roman Empire. There's another component which is much more sophisticated, if you wish, which is understanding that when you seek true religion, you seek truth. But once you have realized that you grasp the truth, you cannot superimpose it on your peers. So you see many religions struggling with this idea. I think I am the true religion. I think I've found truth as I came to believe that this religion is true. But I cannot superimpose this on other people. They must embrace it just because they want to, not because I'm forcing them to do it. And that takes quite a leap historically. And that was a challenge for pagans, but especially for Christians. Because of course, for pagans, it was easy. You put one more god in the pantheon and you're done. But with monotheistic societies, that was different, because that was the radical alternative. Suddenly you have in town somebody who does not believe in your own God, and you believe that there's just one God. And so you see that through the centuries, they started crafting arguments that explain that. And you see the difficulties in developing that argument without falling into the relativistic trap. you can believe in what you believe because there's no truth. That would have been a betrayal of their faith. So reconciling faith and liberty was a true challenge for many religions and religious thinkers. I don't hide, I cannot hide here. So Christians had a role in both preventing people from practicing their own religion, and then they had a role in promoting religious freedom when they realized that religious freedom as such creates that space, and everybody needs that space, no matter how they use that space. So coming back to your question, I would say that when you see the story of religious freedom unfolding, you see a story of mutual claims and a often more painful story of slow realization that you have the right to enjoy your freedom to practice, as I do have my right to enjoy my freedom to practice, because we both are seeking truth, but we cannot superimpose on each other what we believe to be true.
Yeah, as you're speaking, I think that a good parallel that comes to mind that, students would understand pretty easily, even if they're not familiar with religious freedom as most recently explained within the Catholic social doctrine, but as a free church, is like the right to get married, right? So you, in the same way that we look for truth, we need to choose it in order for it to be true for us. And the same thing is true for love, right? It's not just that I have a right to get married. I also need to actually want that person. And if I don't want it, that right is gonna be meaningless and like my freedom. So I think that there is an easy way to grasp it. And thank you for saying that. Yes, it might even be considered, Christian countries might have done a better job at developing the framework for religious freedom, but probably part of the reason is because they were facing a new reality, which is that, as you explained, of a monotheistic religion. And so being forced to things like, how do we want to treat the ones that do not believe what we believe? Which is a good way to understand, that good ideas might come from our own limits. And what is interesting, I think, is that many people think that the beginning of religious freedom coincides with the French Revolution. Do you hear that from students? I mean, as a professor, do you think that there is this misunderstanding or?
Yeah, so I you hear that, of course, there's this narrative that sees the French Revolution as the pinnacle of rights movement before 20th century, and that list of rights would include religious freedom. That is, of course, an oversimplification. I wouldn't go as far as to say that the French Revolution didn't have a clue what freedom was about. Of course, it did have a clue. The point was that there was some sort of attempt to replace the search for truth in religious terms with a theory of rationalistic thought, and which undervalued religion. And that was part of what happened then and what happened afterwards, by the way, especially afterwards. So I think that, and I think that this is one of the purpose of the book. Instead of looking for moments of change, we should look for continuity within history. So, of course, the French Revolution has a role to play. It's part of our history. It's part of what shaped our mind, certainly my European mind. But is it really the date and place of birth of my mind? It's not. Those ideas were already there. Some ideas were developed later. Some ideas had been developed earlier. Some ideas became more sophisticated. If you think of what they did with civil society, with the French Revolution, that is unbelievable. So if you think of religious freedom was born with French Revolution, it will make no sense what happened afterwards, which is the dismantling of civil society. As I said, if religious freedom creates a space for you to enjoy religious freedom, not just an individual, but also as a group, which is what you need if you belong in a organized religion. Well, they dismantle those religions. They dismantle civil societies. So what is that? What happens to that space? The only space you can imagine is the idea of thought. So religious freedom would be a sort of subspecies of human thought. Of course, it's also human thought, but it's also a dimension of belonging. And what are you making of it if you dismantle civil societies? So it will be myopic to say that religious freedom is something we achieved through the French Revolution. And thank you so much, French Revolution, because you gave us what we are still enjoying. What we actually enjoying in most of the Western world, thankfully, is a broad understanding of religious freedom, not just if you compare with the past, but also if you compare with the French Revolution itself. But again, I'm not blaming the French Revolution. You cannot idolize it. That's the only thing.
And oversimplify and forget what came earlier. And as you say, that's what the Universal Declaration of Human Rights even acknowledges, not just the right to think that you have this God and that your God is the right one, is the right to put your kids in religious education, is the right to express it in public, is the right to assembly, is the right to practice it, to respect your own days of the holidays of obligations and so thank you also for this clarification. And again, nobody is saying that the French Revolution was all bad, it was all good, but there is this understanding that probably human rights even started with the French Revolution, and that, as you said, would be a mistake. One of the things that I would like first, you mentioned there are a couple of things that I would like to touch on, but one of them is somehow what you describe as being the thought behind the French Revolution when it comes to religion seems to be the secularité, the laïcité, right? Or the total secularism of the state. And in your book, instead, I seem to recall there is what you call the neutrality myth. The question would be, is secularism and neutrality, are they the same thing? And then whether you use the word myth with neutrality by saying, is it a myth because we want it but we can't achieve it, or is it because it's just unachievable, so stop thinking even about it?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. So when it comes to neutrality and secularism, we went with the neutrality because our understanding was that if you look at the Western world, it's beyond doubt that there was a process of secularization of institutions, of language, etc. You could not, there's a set of institutions and a social life that is not dependent on religious narratives and institutions the way it was. And if you wish, this also created space because you don't have to belong to a certain set of institutions. You can still embrace them, but you don't have to. So this also created a space of liberty. By secularism, they usually depict a scenario in which you can live a purely secularized life, meaning no transcendence dimension, a total separation between religious and non-religious narratives and religious and non-religious institutions, which is not what we see in the West. That is mostly the French, Belgian, used to be somehow Turkish for some decades at least, case, but that is not true, because in most of the West, there's a variety of institutions that are not purely secular. But what sticks, what really is a myth, and we wanted to challenge that myth, is that public institutions and public spaces should be neutral, should be neutralized. So even those who understand that state, non-state, and religious institutions usually intermingle are often of the view that in a perfect world, public life would be a neutral life, not religiously hostile, but neutral, deprived of any religious intonation. And that is a myth. And this ties back to what I said at the outset.
Or it is a religion itself, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But if you visit a country in the West, you can't think of a square in which there's no church. And if you visit other parts of the West or the Middle East, there's no square in which there's no mosque or a synagogue, and or other religious or spiritual buildings or symbols.
Right, the Shinto shrines in Japan. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So there's a variety of identities which are mainly religious, but not only. But by saying that we need to achieve a neutrality phase, you're actually asking that they leave. You're actually pushing them in the background. And we think that this is a myth, and this is not life is lived here. And actually, we hardly believe that life is lived like this anywhere. Or that would be great to live such a life. And so, our argument behind the idea of myth of neutrality is that we should stop thinking of what is the standard in an abstract way and get to what it means to be fair and just with the identities that are there that populate a certain society. It will
Ars,
be
ars bonum et acum. Yeah, the fact that justice is always just if it is close to what it's dealing with, right? You can't have the universal solution. But it's also interesting how why would the public square deprived of any religious significance be better, right? So and when we answer to this question, why would that be better, we are already providing a view of human life and of the world that is colored in a way, right? So the one that argues because it shouldn't be the first thought you have in the morning, for instance.
It is colored. It's not inclusive. It is excluding somebody, and it departs from reality. I was talking with a Spanish friend, and he told me that in there's a lovely Spanish expression through which they convey the idea that there's no problem in sight. And the Spanish phrasing is "no hay moros en la costa," which means you don't have Moors on the coast. You don't see any more. And of course, this ties back to what happened when they were clashing with the Ottoman Empire and the other Muslim population. That is gone. That is thankfully gone. There's no clash of civilization. That is gone. But that is just part of a phrase. It just stays there. We cannot it, we cannot expect or even hope that civilization leaves all those aspects away in the back. They will stick around. We don't know how much. It's just part of culture.
Yeah, and again, this is one side of the coin. So like the cultural and like so too many multifaceted thing, and the other one is religious freedom as a deep meaning for each person, as you said at the very beginning, is the most important question you have in life is whether you think there is a meaning and what meaning there is to your life on earth. So it's not just the mama li turchi would be the Italian expression maybe of when we were scared of the Ottomans in a similar way. But what I wanted to ask related to this is like, is religious freedom just one among the rights? Is it the foundation of other rights? Can we put like, are some rights more important than others?
Oh, that's a good question. So first, I'm a comparativist. So I don't like to give big theoretical answers because I think that so when it comes to treating religious freedom as a space in which you can seek your own purpose in life. Of course, there's no place like that when it comes to its own importance. When it comes to specific constitutional frameworks, you see a variety of frameworks. And I've seen constitutions and constitutional frameworks that see human dignity as intangible. You cannot in any way put dignity in balance. Whereas other constitutions do that job. But if you look into the details, they usually do that because of how they understand dignity itself. So when it comes to balancing rights, I would say that we discovered that the religious freedom is a big part of human life. Is it the only part of human life? No, of course not. But it characterizes most of human life. So many constitutional frameworks need to balance competing rights, like most countries did during the pandemic, of course, with controversial results. But at some point, many had to do that. To some extent, it is unavoidable that we'll have to balance religious freedom with other rights. So, I'll give you an example. I can't think of any constitution in the world that allows you not to pay taxes by claiming conscientious objection. Of course, I'm making a hypothetical, but that hypothetical was utilized sometimes in courts. So there are limits, of course. The problem is that, of course, the limits must acknowledge the importance of religious freedom. So when coming to another prong of your question, is like any other right? No, it's not. It's not any other right. And when you balance rights, you need to understand how important they are for the individual, for the group at large. What is beyond that, and I don't want to derail the conversation, Mariana, but I think it's very important actually. And it's actually the main issue we had in mind when you drafted the third chapter. What we are watching now, most of Western world, is using religious freedom of other rights as weapons to make claims. And they make those claims in courts. And usually those claims are not just claims about the very specific controversy that the case is about. people, individuals and groups are seeking recognition, societal, legal, political recognition through the battles they are fighting.
It's an identity.
Yeah, yes, I was coming to that. So what you're claiming is not a certain right. You're actually claiming your own identity. And what we are saying is we understand that. And sometimes you see underprivileged, straight up society making those claims because those weapons are available in certain societies. But we must also acknowledge the fact that they are hardly able to achieve what they want to achieve. Because winning in courts will not bring the society at large on your side. Winning in court can bring resentment, can bring more social ostracism. And so what we are trying to convey with the book is a sense of humility when you make legal claims based on religious freedom or other rights. Of course, they are genuine claims, and you need to make those claims in courts because those are ways to redress injustices. But there are types of social injustices that cannot be redressed simply by taking somebody to court. You can win in court, but you can still lose at societal level. And we wanted that the next generation of lawyers become knowledgeable about this dynamic. It's law is great. I teach law, but law has limits, and making claims that pit rights against each other for the sake of gaining recognition is creating and fomenting resentment. And we don't need resentment, right, in such a polarized scenario.
You are a professor because you're very good at this, and I think you just taught us something really important, as you said, for the future generation. To your point made in the book, maybe there are courts where using also the term rights makes more sense than in others because of the history and because of the framework. So even that should not be seen as a solution applied in one place with success, and that should be applied elsewhere. A lot of people, Andrea, including, a lot of people that I respect for everything they write, have expressed high criticism to the whole world of human rights. And I know that's not your position. I know that my PhD supervisors has written about the rights gone mad, derechos en loquitos. Someone I think is more similar to what you were saying was Professor Marian Glendon, who, of course, is a big fan of human rights and the Universal Declaration, but acknowledges that rights are going a little crazy. And I would like to read two paragraphs that she wrote, two paragraphs from an article she wrote in 2019. I think it appeared in First Things, which I think it talks a little bit about the same European and American situation. Then I would ask you to just comment on them. So she writes, in European countries such as Norway, Denmark, Switzerland, Germany, and France, there is a growing divide between the secular state, backed by a secularized majority population that pursues animal rights, children's rights, and non-discrimination, and minority religious groups defending their right to practice their faith. Jewish and Muslim groups, for example, now must defend circumcision, an ancient ritual integral to their faiths, against human rights groups, declaring it a violation of children's rights to bodily integrity. The capacious right to religious freedom in the Universal Declaration's Article 18, which includes the right to manifest one's religion, teaching, practice, worship, and observance, is being narrowed to mean only a right to believe and worship, not a right to practice and observe. In the United States, she continues, the reliance on rights and courts to solve disputes encourages a winner-takes-all attitude at the expense of tolerance and compromise. Whereas most democracies introduce policies on controversial terms, such as abortion and sexual freedom, through legislation and compromise, In the US, they have often been dictated by courts, thereby alienating parts of the population and reducing the scope up for political settlements. End of quote. So I think that the second part is what you mentioned. You were just mentioning this. The winner takes it all attitude. And if you can, of course, add to what she said and what wrote. What I think would be interesting would to address the first part. And so the European situation she describes, which seems to be different from the way at least she phrases.
In which sense you think that it's different from the way she phrases?
It seems to be more minority versus state than people versus people against other people, which I don't know if it's better or worse. I don't know if that's also your
Yeah.
perception.
Yeah. So it's if you look at the notion of rights, there's a sort of, especially in countries like most continental European countries that have a written constitution, when you claim your right, you're actually claiming your right vis-a-vis the majority, because there's expectation that the constitutional court or Supreme Court will protect you from the will of the majority, because you are claiming a right that is based on the constitution. But what you often see now is minorities in Europe, especially religious minorities, being limited in the enjoyment of religious freedom for the sake of other interests that are not right, or that are ideals like non-discrimination. We make several examples of this, I think, when it comes to Muslims. Look, if you take the crucifix case and the Lao Tzu case, that went, it was quite a bumpy journey, but at the end, they decided the crucifix could stay. But when it comes to religious freedom for Muslims, which are the minority that is involved here in France, I can't think of very few chances in which they won a case. Although they claim their own rights, they often told that the Republic or the European Convention of Rights or the European Union law prioritizes other values, whether it is non-discrimination, neutrality, duty to socialize. I'm mentioning several wordings that were used, and that is, I think, a sign that rights are being weaponized both by the majority and the minority. So sometimes you have a minority doing that, but it oftentimes happens that you have the majority using rights or using other constitutional values or principles to limit religious freedom. So I would not criticize Marian Glendon. I was just saying that you see different parts of the same society using parts of the same constitutional documents in opposite direction. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does to me. And let me rephrase it to see if I got you rightly. Yeah, the strategy might change because we live in different frameworks, but it's still a weaponization. So in both places, what happens is that we are using rights as weapons and not as ways to live together and enjoy them.
Exactly.
Which I think is a great way to phrase it, and is one of the reasons I think your book was, as I said at the beginning, for once I was not reading someone proving his own point. I know your religious views because I know you personally, but I didn't get them from the book, which doesn't mean you were a supporter of secularism. And I would love to see more books written that way that also at the same time do not end up being relativistic. Before we close and I let you go and I let you go back to your wife, your son, um, I would like to ask you, what else would you want to say about the book you wrote that I think, that we left out? I sometimes do a very bad job at doing the first big introduction. So probably I should have said that it was a comparative study of how the different courts have treated religion. Something about the book. And also if after that, something that you would like to say to the students who might be considering law school or who might already be in law school that might listen to this episode.
Thank you. So actually, I'll pick up from what you said with your last words. So John Whitty and I have different upbringings, different faith. We're Christian, but different denominations and different paths of life. And what was interesting to me is that nobody neither of us gave up their beliefs, but we clearly overlapped on a variety of grounds, which is what the book is about. So we can have different views of specific aspects, but when it comes to these issues, I think that these issues are clearly trans-denominational. They're not just something that Catholics or Protestants care about or Christians care about. This is something that identifies people who care about religious freedom, period. Coming to what I would say to lawyers, wannabe lawyers, it's actually what you find in the third chapter, I think. So being a lawyer comes with a responsibility, and the responsibility means acknowledging the limits of law, which are spaces of a civil society. You can't bring somebody to court and claim that you have a right to be a friend of him or her. The same is true for several aspects of individual social life. So when it comes to rights, they are such an important part of our society, 21st century societies, that we need to handle them well. And this is something new because we used to believe that we would build a decent society, especially through rights and laws. But now we are seeing those limits. We're seeing the limits of laws and rights. And we wanted also to write a memento for those who are studying, for those who will be studying the book, that you can't achieve everything with laws and rights. There are things that are beyond laws and rights, and rightly so.
Thank you, Andrea. I think this is the perfect way to close. And it's like we're not diminishing the role of law, but it should stay out. They used it to say it should stay out of the bedroom. It should stay out of a lot of places, right? And like you can think of every aspect of our life has been so entangled with this rights claim and rights talk that it's really hard to even develop interpersonal relationships at some point. Thank you very much, Andrea. I'm looking forward for this book to be translated because I cannot accept a no for an answer here. So let me know when that happens. And thank you again for being on our show. We hope that your studies will bring you back to the United States and maybe you can add a stop in Austin.
Oh, I'll gladly do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you again. Thank you very much for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the episode of our show, What We Can't Not Talk About. If you did like the episode, remember to share it among your friends. Do not forget to subscribe, and if you can, please donate to the Austin Institute. Your donations make it possible for us to continue to do this, but above all, they support our local programming and the important, if not crucial, research of our fellows. Thank you.